Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at another rendition of Welt, sieh, hier, dein, Leben, which translates to O world, see your life here. Similar to the chorales from the last two episodes, we're going to see some commonalities between the two of them with slight changes in the voicings of the chords and how Bach approaches cadences as well. So with that being said, let's just hop right into the analysis. So we have three sharps in the key signature. We start with A major, we end with A major. I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is A major. We go immediately to D major, D, D, F sharp, and A, which is our 4 chord. Then we go to B, D, G sharp, and B. I do think this C is an accented non-chord tone, which would make this 7-6, G sharp diminished over B, and that takes us to A major, A, E, A, and C sharp, which is our tonic triad. We have a couple of passing tones in the upper three voices, which do give us kind of like a passing diminished or diminished or B minor chord, but we have this A in the bass here, and that doesn't really, we could analyze that as a 2-4-2 chord, but I don't really, it's not going to make it onto the page just because of the fact that the chord is incomplete, and that would be inconsistent with my analytical method that I've been using. But if you want to analyze a 2-4-2 chord there, you definitely can. But then we get this interesting G natural, which is indicative of the fact that A, which we have on the next beat, is not functioning purely as our tonic, and instead is morphing into 5 of 4. This G has a tendency to want to resolve to F sharp in this context, and F sharp will become the third of a D major chord. This B is also in passing as well. So even with the B there, which does change the harmony slightly, it would turn into like a C sharp diminished chord over G, actually. You know what? You could analyze that there. Now that I'm seeing that, I'll go ahead and put an arrow there. You could analyze this as 7-4-2 of 4 as well, instead of this being 5 4, just because that B gets introduced as well, and it does resolve to 4-6-5 coincidentally. So maybe that is a better analysis, just because of the fact that the tenor changes. I'm actually going to walk that back and reanalyze it that way and say that the A is in fact it's an accented non-chord tone, and rather this G and this B are both chord tones as well, coincidentally speaking. So that would make this 7-4-2, half diminished of 4, and then we go 2-4-6-5. So that's pretty cool that it resolves that way. And then we have a half cadence here, which is a little curious. It might even be a Phrygian half cadence. I'm not 100% sure. I'd be interested in what you have to say about it. If you have a take on it, leave it in the comment section, please. I'd love to reply and read your comment. But we end on C sharp major here in first inversion, which is very interesting. But I do think this D major chord is our common chord between the two keys, and it becomes 6-6-5 in the key of F sharp minor. That takes us to G sharp, B, B, and D. Now what's interesting about this potentially Phrygian half cadence, oh, you know what? I take that back. I don't think this is a Phrygian half cadence. I'm going to put a line through that because this chord is in first inversion. That's why it doesn't sound that way. But what's actually interesting about it is it's going from F sharp to E sharp, which is also a half step, which has, Phrygian cadential qualities to it, but it's not the flat 6 going to the flat 5 of the chord. It is the root going to the leading tone, which is interesting, or the flat 6 going to the going to the 5 of the scale. It's the root going to the leading tone, so it's kind of a roundabout way of being Phrygian. So maybe it is Phrygian in regards to the fact that there's half-step movement in the bass, but not in the traditional sense. So this G sharp chord, it could be a root position 2 chord, or if you look at this F sharp and this A as chord tones, that would make the B here in the tenor, the root of this chord, which would make it 4-4-3, B minor 7 over F sharp. Either way, it's some type of predominant chord that precedes C sharp major over E sharp, which is 5-6, E sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and C sharp. And that takes us to our next phrase, which ends with that same ambiguous cadence that I've been talking about in the last two videos, where there's elements of E major and elements of A major at the same time. I think we're still in the key of A major, but I'll leave that up for you to decide. I think they're both valid analyses. So we start off with F sharp minor, F sharp, A, F sharp, and C sharp, which is our resolution to this half cadence, with a passing tone in the melody. And I think this is where we go back to the key of A. It's now our 6th chord. Interesting that 6 is the chord that we go into both keys here. I think that's just a coincidence, but it's interesting that it happens that way. And that takes us to A major in first inversion. We have C sharp, A, E, and E, 1-6. Neighbor tone in the bass, and then we have another A major chord in first inversion, C sharp, E, A, and E. No need to reanalyze. Little passing tone in the melody as well before we get E major, E, E, G sharp, and B. It's our 5th chord, passing 7th in the bass, and then we have C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, and C sharp with a passing 7th in the melody. That becomes 5 of 6 because C sharp is the dominant of F sharp, or maybe more accurately, E sharp is the leading tone to F sharp, just like we learned from our first phrase. And that takes us to F sharp minor, F sharp, C sharp, G, and A. G sharp. That's a 9/8 suspension over the bass. It's very common to see 9/8 suspensions over tonicized chords. But yeah, I mean, this would be, if we were analyzing this in the key of E, this probably would be the start where F sharp is our 2, and then B, B, E, and A. 4/3 suspensions are very common over root position 5 chords. This would be our 5 chord just by itself, but because I think we're still in the key of A, it's going to be 5 of 5, more specifically 5/7 of 5, because we have the 7th of the chord in the melody. And that takes us to our tonic, or I guess our functioning tonic triad here, E major, E, B, E, and G sharp, but in this case it's just being tonicized, so it's locally our tonic, but globally our dominant. The next phrase ends in a half cadence, and there's less room for debate here because we're pretty clearly in the key of A, and we have no chromaticism, so it'd be really interesting to see how Bach would be able to make a modulation work with no chromaticism. So after our E major chord, we get E7 over D, D, G sharp, B, and E, which would just be taking our 5 chord and turning it into 5/4-2. You could call this a direct modulation as well if you were coming from the key of E. And that takes us to where we would expect A major in first inversion, C sharp, A, E, and A, which is 1/6. That's where we would expect a 5/4-2 chord to resolve. The root is a 5th down, and the bass is down by step. Not all 4/2 chords resolve that way, but virtually all of them do. And that takes us to a debatable chord here. We have B, D, F sharp, and B, which could be a 2 chord, but I think this F sharp's an accented non-chord tone. It's actually G sharp diminished over B. We see this pattern a lot in Bach, where also Bach a lot of the times plays with the idea of 2 and 7 being close to one another and separated by that whole step there. So 1/6 going to 7/6, we would typically expect that to go to a 1 chord, which in this case it does. A, E, A, and C sharp. This pattern of 2 similar chords separated by an inversion in a chord that is a diatonic step below in first inversion is very common to traverse that stepwise motion in the bass, either going down or going up. And sometimes we see a variation of this chord progression where we, instead of seeing a first inversion chord, a diatonic step below the outer, I guess the bread of this chordal sandwich, we see a root position chord that is either a step above, a step above, or second inversion, 4th below. But B is a non-chord tone, D is a non-chord tone, C sharp and E are both chord tones. That takes us to D, F sharp, B, and D, which is B minor over D. We know that Bach loves 2/6 chords, especially in cadential contexts, passing 7th in the alto, passing tone in the melody, and then we cadence on E major, E, B, G sharp, and B. And that takes us to the next phrase, which ends with an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of F sharp minor. So we're visiting the key of F sharp minor again. I think one of the unique things about this rendition of the chorale is that we see a move to F sharp minor earlier as well as later, whereas the previous renditions only really referenced F sharp minor going into the second system. So we start the phrase off with secondary dominance, a little chromatic bass line here with E sharp, G sharp, G sharp, and C sharp. We know that C sharp major is 5/6 in the key of A major, and that would take us to 6 like we would expect. We have F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. That takes us to G, B, F sharp, and B. I don't think this was a 7/7 chord like in some situations. I think this chord would need a D in order for there to be an argument to be made about it being diminished. So I think this F sharp has a 7/6 suspension over the bass, making this E major over G sharp, which is 5/6. And that takes us to A major, A, E, and C sharp, our tonic triad. Passing tones in the tenor and the melody before we get A sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and E, which is F sharp 7 over A sharp. That's 5/6/5 of 2, because A sharp's the leading tone to B, and F sharp is B's dominant. And that takes us to B minor, and this is a pretty, we saw this 2 episodes ago, how Bach used this B minor chord to go to the key of F sharp minor, or maybe to the key of B minor as well, but I think this is F sharp minor, and we just end with that interesting Picardy third that creates some ambiguity, because also the cadence ends with the fifth of the chord in the melody, and even though there's nothing expressly, like there's no express rule about the fifth of the chord being in the melody for half cadences, it's very common that you find them in half cadences like we do here, but not always, right? Sometimes we see half cadences, or at least I look at this as a half cadence where the third or even the root of the chord is in the melody, but a lot of the times we see the fifth of the chord in the melody, and tonicizing B minor and having the key be F sharp minor, there's a lot of flipping around here where we're looking at B minor and F sharp minor sort of in a congruent light here. But yeah, we resolve to 2, B minor, B, B, F sharp, and D, which I think takes us to the key of F sharp minor. Like I said, it's now our 4 chord. Then we have some shared tones here, B, G sharp, E sharp, and D, which is E sharp minor 7, or sorry, E sharp fully diminished because it's not a D sharp, over B, which would be 7/4/3 in the key of F sharp minor, and then resolves to F sharp major, F sharp, A sharp, F sharp, and C sharp, which is our major tonic. That Picardy third is very unique about this particular chorale, and creates a little bit of ambiguity in the cadence. Our penultimate phrase ends in the key of E major, but we start off, I believe, in the key of A major. Not a very strong move to the key of A major, but based on what we know about earlier cadences, or sorry, early phrases, the relationship between F sharp minor and A major at the beginning of the phrase feels very A major-like, even though we don't have a dominant to, I guess, solidify the key. We know from earlier material that Bach is in the key of A major, at least in my opinion. So we end in an imperfect authentic cadence in E major. Like I said, we start off with F sharp minor, which could be a direct modulation to A major, but I don't think there's anything more A major like about F sharp minor. Actually, I would say F sharp minor is more likened to F sharp minor than it is to A major, especially coming after an F sharp major chord. It's an interesting progression for sure. And we have a passing tone here in the melody as well, but I'm going to say it's also our 6th chord in the key of A, and that takes us to A major over C sharp, A, E, and E, which is our 1/6 chord, and we've seen this progression as well. And like I mentioned in yesterday's chorale, and I think in the 2 episodes ago, my memory's a little foggy, but the second phrase and the penultimate phrase are similar to one another. If we break this chorale up into sort of a binary form, we have the A section, we have the A section here with a phrase here that's similar, a phrase here that's similar, and a contrasting phrase, a phrase here that's similar, a phrase here that's similar, and a contrasting phrase. and they're sort of there are elements of symmetry between the two sections, and it's cool that it ends up working like this on the page as well visually. But after our 1-6 chord, we have a neighbor tone in the bass. We have another 1-6 chord here, no need to reanalyze. C sharp, A, and E with a passing 7th here, and I do think this is where we modulate because we get D sharp right on the next beat. So in the key of E, I'm going to call this 4-6, A major over C sharp, and that takes us directly to B7 over D sharp, A, F sharp, and B, which is 5-6-5. And that takes us to E major, E, G sharp, E, and, sorry, not E major, C sharp. We see an emergence of the use of C sharp minor again, but in the key of E major, it is 6-6, so it threw me for a loop there. The C sharp is, it creates a deceptive progression because we would expect one there. It deceived me from an analytical perspective, but it's just going to turn, most likely into a turnaround for our cadence. 6 will lead to 2, then 5, then to 1, as it often does in Bach's progressions, at least in the chorales. That takes us to E, C sharp, F sharp, and A, which is F sharp minor 7 over E, which is 2-4-2. We would expect that to go to 5-6 of some sort, which it does. D sharp, B, F sharp, and A. So 5-6, but even more specifically 5-6-5. So we see 2 instances of 4-2 chords, actually 3 instances of 4-2 chords resolving where we would expect them to. And then we cadence on E major, E, B, E, and G sharp, which is our tonic triad and reposition in this case, unlike the ending of this phrase where I think we're still in the key of A major. Yeah, again, in contrast to the progression from the second phrase to the third phrase, I think in the key of A major, this is our 5 chord, and we're moving to E7 over D, D, G sharp, B, and E. You can call this a direct modulation as well if you are of that school of thought, but to me, I'm just going to say that it's a progression back to the, I guess, framing E from it being 5, or it being 1, to it functioning as a dominant, and it's D natural that accomplishes that. We would expect that to go to A major in first inversion, which it does, just like it does going from the second phrase to the third phrase. 1-6, C sharp, A, E, and A. And then we get a similar progression to the third phrase here, where this F sharp I think is an accented non-chord tone, and we have B, D, G sharp, and B, which is 7-6. And similar to this progression, we would expect A major in root position, which we get. A, E, A, and C sharp. Very common pattern in Bach. Passing tones in the outer voices before we get C sharp, E, A, and E, which is just taking our chord and putting it in first inversion. No need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Then we have some non-chord tones off of the harmonic rhythm here with D, F sharp, A, and D, which is our 4 chord D major, and that takes us to E, E, A, and C sharp, which is 1-6-4, A major over E. And we typically expect that to be accompanied by a 5 chord of some sort, E, D, G sharp, and B, 5-7. Sometimes we use the bracket to show their relationship with one another. At least that's how I learned how to do it, so it's a bit of a habit, but don't really need it. It's kind of auxiliary. And then afterwards we mark our perfect authentic cadence like we usually do, and end with a 1 chord, A, C sharp, E, and A, tonic triad root position. That is today's analysis. So really not too many takeaways with this particular chorale. Lots of 4-2 chords resolving the way they're supposed to. We do have, let's see, what would be an example of something that we would want to take away from this chorale? I think maybe potentially our tonic functioning as 5 of 4 here is interesting, but I think looking a little bit deeper, it's more than just our tonic operating as 5 of 4. It's the chord changes because the B gets introduced and actually changes the structure of the chord, or has potential to change the structure of the chord from an analytical perspective. But other than that, I really think the only takeaway from this chorale that I've been, keeping track of for my own interest is the chromatic bass lines. We have E, E sharp and F sharp, which is not really a chromatic bass line in the same sense that we typically see them, because this E is part of the previous phrase, but later in the phrase we have A sharp, and B, or even further, G sharp, A sharp, and B. So other than that chromatic bass line, all of the harmony more or less operates the way we would expect, and I think I'm going to cap the video off on those thoughts. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video if you enjoyed the content as well. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.